I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. This week in the Poetry of Predicament podcast, I'm very happy to be welcoming Shaun Chamberlin to the podcast. And Shaun is a person who's picked up and run with an extensive body of work, originally created by David Fleming, starting with his tome, The Lean Logic body of work. And I just have one of the most heartful and inspiring conversations and real conversations with Shaun. I hope you enjoy Shaun Chamberlin. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Poetry of Predicament podcast. I am your ever-present host, Dean Walker, and that other person over there is Shaun Chamberlin. And likely that many of the folks who watch the Poetry of Predicament are familiar with you, Shaun. But for those who are not, I've had the pleasure of just finishing up the most recent course, online course that you offered, a deep dive course, which means a deep dive into what your previous course was, which was it seemed like a blending of your work, substantial work, picking up the massive body of work from David Fleming and lean logic and so on, and then your history with transition towns and innumerable other both collapse aware and creating alternative notions of community and regenerative systems design, community design, and on and on. And so you, as far as I'm concerned, are one of the kind of cornerstone personalities or characters that has really, you've walked a substantial part of this path that for many people these days are new to it. And those of us who've been around it for a while, you've been in some remarkable parts of the conversation. The lean logic side it's literally like back in my childhood, it was the Whole Earth catalog was this giant formatted thing, and you could find anything about prepping for negative futures or possibly great futures or intentional communities. It was the thing, and I kind of hold lean logic in that that same little pocket of the library. And so it's been truly a pleasure to be in your courses, and even more of a pleasure to meet you and have some conversations with you. And I've watched quite a few interviews you've done with other people, and I'm going to be putting a couple of links to those earlier conversations with other people. Those are going to include far more of your biography and the steps that you went through to the various lineages and ideas and so on. And as I finished up this last course with you and we had that brief conversation that we had, and I just thought there's a wealth of experience and wisdom and aliveness that you bring, and you are clearly living it. You are engaged with new ways of being and new ways of relating and new ways of communitying. And I wanted to find out what's fresh and real and alive for you right now. And I'd love to find out if you would share what are the concerns you have about the world when you look out into it now, because you are also just extraordinarily aware of what's going on. You've got a pulse on so many of our predicaments. And I'd also love to know, I sort of know because I saw, a number of the people you included in your course, what's inspiring you right now, and who are the people that you really want to be around, to be able to conspire with and to collaborate with um, and be engaged with. So thanks so much for spending this time and for sitting through this long introduction. And, I just want to open it up for you to be able to start wherever you'd like to start, knowing that people, if they want a full-on introduction of you, they'll go take care of that. So I would say just start out with what's most alive for you today.
Dean. Okay, well, what's most alive for me today is grief and overwhelm. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the energy I feel I'm really engaging with right now. A sense of, as you say, there's so much unfolding right now in this interrelated global mess, that it creates, ironically, alongside an employment crisis, but it creates an overabundance of critically important, urgent things to engage with. Yeah, as I mentioned to you when we had that brief conversation the other week, I've been really exploring this distinction that I worked out with my mentor Jane around good work versus my work. As I say, there's this kind of overabundance of good work, and I've had this, and I often have people reaching out to me saying, hey, be great to have you get involved with this or promote that or talk about the other, and my instinct's been, yeah, that's good work, that's urgent, that's important, of course, how can I help? And a couple of times in my life have really hit burnout hard, and I'm trying to come into better relationship with that, and I think the discernment I've been lacking is this good work, my work distinction, that you can be like, okay, that's good work, I support that, that's urgent, that's important, but it's not my work actually. And maybe I can point someone at someone else who I think suspect it might be their work, or maybe I can just wish them well or support them in some other way, but trying to learn to be supportive and show solidarity in ways that don't lead to always doing the urgent and never getting to the important. And I feel in myself, as you say, I've just taught this 2-month course, Surviving the Future, the deeper dive, in collaboration with Sterling College in Vermont. And it was a couple of months of intense work to set it up and get it all going, and then a couple more to actually deliver it. And yeah, coming out the far side of that, just have this really deep sense that it's time to do a lot less. It's time to breathe more. It's funny you say I've got my finger on the pulse of so many things. I really don't feel like that right now. I feel like there's an awful lot of things which I haven't been keeping as close an eye on as I would like because of all I've been doing. And yeah, really coming back to that term discernment for me at the moment seems to be a really big one. Just heeding the little voice inside you that just niggles and says, yeah, that was the right thing for you to do last month, but is it right now? There's a line from Leonard Cohen, steer your way carefully past the truth you believed in yesterday. And Leonard Cohen's never been a poor guide in my life, so I take that counsel seriously. And so yeah, I suppose in a sense you could say that I have this sense that there are almost two polarities or phases that I go through, and one is a very reflective, reading a lot, listening a lot, meditating a lot, walking in nature a lot, just being very receptive, both externally and internally, to my own body. And then inevitably, as you listen a lot, eventually you find something that you just think, wow, this is really exciting and I want to get involved with this, and then quite naturally segue into a bit more of a doing and a kind of outward looking phase. And yeah, my sense in myself is being quite overdue for some of the former. And also you asked about, what really excites me at the moment. Just at the end of last year, I heard a talk by Isabelle Fremeau and Jay Jordan from the ZAD in France, which, for those who don't know, is I think a 4,000 acre piece of land in France that the French government planned to build an airport on. But because they'd been planning to build something there for decades, it hadn't been developed and had become this effectively wildlife sanctuary. Long story short, this group kind of went there to defend this piece of land, squatted, built homes there, built strong relationships with the local farming communities there, and together have created this incredible place that's been there for decades now, but which the French government have literally attacked with riot police and tanks, and just literally assaulted, was pretty well razed to the ground. And there'd been this agreement that if that happened, then a month later they would come back and rebuild, and everyone thought that would be kind of a symbolic thing, that maybe they'd put up a hut or something. But actually, I think it was 20,000 people turned up from across France, brought huge amounts, like prefabricated buildings, and were there for a weekend and just rebuilt the entire thing. And then the armed police were sent back again to kind of raise it again. But by this point, people were so wedded to this place that they'd sort of rebuilt with their own hands that it became this huge pitched battles for weeks, to the point where there were doctors who were volunteering on the site, who actually wrote to the then recently elected French president and said, look, we're treating war wounds here. These are French citizens being attacked by the French police. And as Issa and Jay tell the story, basically this newly elected and notionally socialist president, in their opinion, decided that, sooner or later someone's going to get killed here, and that isn't a kind of storm that I'm ready to weather. And so eventually backed down, and the place has now kind of been legalized and is an example of 4,000 acres of land being preserved for the natural world and for non-hierarchical community. And so I heard them, they recently published a book called We Are Nature Defending Itself, a very short little book about this venture. And they came to the UK the end of last year to do a speaking tour about it all, and it was the most electrifying thing I'd heard in such a long time. I was so absolutely blown away. And so I invited Issa to be one of the teachers on the deeper dive course, and I think that part of my reflective listening time may well involve a visit to Brittany to see this place with my own eyes and get more of a sense of what's going on there. I'm going to have to brush up on my French, but I can do that. So yeah, it's a slightly rambling answer maybe, but that's some of the stuff that's really moving in me at the moment. It really excites me that there are people like that who are determinedly independent of a lot of the unsustainable systems that are collapsing, and successfully defending those alternatives now, which I think hasn't been the case. And maybe it's hopeful, but I wonder whether that's a beginning of centralized powers weakening ability to enforce power at the extremes, which tends to be how centralized powers collapse. And yeah, if there's one thing, I mean, there's one of our students on our Surviving the Future courses, who's become a good friend of mine, is from Venezuela, and she talks about the collapse she experienced in her home country, and how challenging she finds it, that now she finds that even after kind of people have been wildly let down by capitalist structures and looking for security in money, that really still all the longing there is, how do we get it back? You know, how do we get Nutella back in the supermarkets again? You know, those were the good old days, and we want to get them back. And she finds that so sad that we haven't managed to tell a sufficiently intact and compelling story of what might be better, and so all the longing is just to go back to that which is causing so much exploitation, devastation, annihilation, colonialism, you name it. You know, it's a weird system to want to sustain or regain. And so things like the ZAD, you know, that's what really excites me, and that's part of why I love leading these Surviving the Future courses, because they're a chance for us to explore examples from around the world of different people and different communities who are really building all different kinds of alternatives, whether they be based in resistance, whether they be based in building alternatives, whether they be based in, you know, improving things, just helping those who've you know, fallen through the cracks. And that strikes me as important work today, like so that as things fall apart, we grasp something new and better rather than for something old and decrepit.
Yeah, thank you. I'm hoping that I can get a couple of links from you in addition to We Are Nature Defending Herself, and so I can get a clearer picture about this. I think you call it, is it ZAD?
ZAD, yeah, ZAD, which is a government acronym originally in French, which means essentially a zone to be developed. But they've kind of co-opted that, and it's now a zone to be defended. Okay. So they've kind of retooled the acronym, but yeah, it's called the ZAD, or ZAD.
So I'm curious, is it possible that will mean you spending a considerable amount of time living there?
I've no idea, Dean. I at the moment, my priority is just to clear up some of my backlog and catch my breath. You know, I'm already part of a community in Ireland, which which is doing beautiful alternative things itself. But I think I'm by inclination a bit of a nomad. I mean, I quit flying 20 years ago now. But I travel around, and I don't drive, but I travel around by bike and train and ferry. Yeah, I mean, long story, but since childhood, I've always been moving around. I've never really been grounded in one place. which is ironic in a way, given, you know, the emphasis in my work on the importance of place. But I do think that there's a role in there. I mean, as David Fleming writes, actually, that the place of a sea captain or might be the high seas, you know, rather than a particular geographical location. Mm-hmm. And there's an awful lot to be said for particular geographical locations and grounding in them. And I, am deeply connected, but not only to one. And so I feel that, it feels a good fit and a good change of pace for me to be thinking about visiting that place. And I don't know. I don't know enough about it yet to know how I might be able to offer something useful to the place. It might be that I'm just there for a week or two and bring what I see back.
I'm curious if you'd share a little bit about what seems to be working for the community that you were living in Ireland. How's it? How has it come to be described? I forget what you just said, but basically, you know, something's working, and you're as close to calling it home as a nomad might. So I'm curious.
It's definitely one of my homes.
What's working?
Well, I guess what's working is that you know, people periodically. I mean, for anyone who doesn't know, my late mentor David Fleming's life work, Lean Logic, is a large tome. It was very much his life's work. So there are many words in there, presented in this uniquely holistic format. But very often, unsurprisingly, I get asked, you know, okay, well, if you could really boil it all down to, you know, nutshell, what's he on about? And I would say what he's on about is that I think his work starts where most other books about collapse end, really, or certainly until very recently have done. You know, it tends to be, look, if we don't change direction, we're headed for this awful collapse situation. So here's what we need to do. And you get to the point where you're reading these books and you're like, yeah, sure, I agree, but we're not going to, are we? And so that doesn't seem very interesting. And really, David's starting point was, we're not going to. What's going to happen is we're going to plow on until we collapse under the weight of our unsustainability. So A, what might that look like? And B, what can we do now that might improve that? Not avert it, but just prepare for it or improve it, ameliorate it in some way. And in essence, I think he says, as analysts and thinkers have been warning us for at least decades, money is a terrible place to look for your security, you know, and yet that's what we're encouraged to, right? You know, get a pension, get a good job, buy a house, you know, all of that. And it's not even seen as advice, it's seen as pretty much moral obligation. You know, if you're not financially independent, if you aren't paying your way, then you probably are ashamed of yourself, because that's so deep in our culture. You know, you probably don't want to admit that to your friends and family or yourself. And yet, as I sometimes say, financial independence doesn't exist. It's a complete fallacy. Even if you're obscenely rich, which I wouldn't say is something to aspire to, but if you are, you're not independent. Someone else still grew your food. Someone else still built your house. All that having lots of money allows you to do is be dependent on people you don't know, instead of being dependent on people you do know. Because as we all know, if you don't have money, you end up relying on your relationships, on friends, on family, and whether at the personal scale or the national. So the first thing I would say is, you know, let's just notice that the majority of people in cultures like the ones you and I were born into give most of their waking hours to achieving financial independence in one way or another. And yet, if you get there, it's actually quite a miserable place to be, because you don't really have any close friends, because you don't need anyone, because you're independent, and everyone becomes replaceable. You know, if you don't like one shopkeeper, you just buy what you need from another one. And so it's this really weird thing where we're all desperately trying to achieve something that's not actually great. And, you know, you hear extremely rich people speak, and they don't sound like the happiest people you've ever heard of by any stretch of the imagination. And so really what David's saying is, okay, so if we didn't depend on money for our security, and if we didn't depend on economic growth for the continuation of our society, well, what then? And as a cultural historian, he has a long enough vision to look back further than the last couple of hundred years of this kind of market-based insanity blip in human history. A couple of hundred years. I mean, you know, there have been Homo sapiens for about 300,000 years, and yet we act like this is the only thing we've ever known. And basically what he says is, instead of money, look for your security in the two economies that have always supported thriving on Earth. And those are the natural world. You know, I sometimes say the only economic system that's ever worked is nature. You know, it's not capitalism and it's not communism, it's nature. Every other system is just toying with the surplus that nature created. So one economic system that works is nature. The other is what David calls the informal economy. It's all the ways that human beings relate to each other that don't involve money, which of course was the entire economy until money was invented, which is only 5,000 years ago, something like that. So for almost all of human existence, there wasn't even money. And yet now it seems kind of like this piffling little side thing, the ways, oh, well, what you mean, like volunteering or, you know, whatever, that's just a little side gig, right? But actually, I mean, it's still in many ways the core economy. It's still what raises almost all the children. It's still what teaches us all how to exist as social beings, how to speak language, how to and it's still really core to most of the things we really love. You know, when we get together with friends and chat, nobody's paying us to be there, but we want to be there. You know, it's culture, it's community, it's joy, it's romance, it's, you know, all the stuff that we do just because we love it was actually the basis of society and economies for most of human history. You know, like I was stunned when I first read the manuscript for Lean Logic, to realize that, you know, in the Middle Ages, which we're sort of often trained to think of as these horrific times of great drudgery and suffering, and many places in Europe had holidays for 4 to 6 months of the year. You know, hang on, like what? But we're the ones with all this advanced technology that's doing all the drudgery for us, so we don't have to work so hard, right? What? and what did they do with all this non-laboring time? Well, they had carnivals, they sung songs, they had parties, and what did that do? Well, that bonded people. You know, that's like, well, of course I'm not going to let you starve to death. You're the guy with that amazing singing voice that's absolutely central to our celebration every 6 months, you know, or, you know, you're the person who choreographed that dance that changed my sister's life when she met her husband, or, you know, whatever. Like, that's people hanging out and doing amazing cultural, artistic, joyous things. It's what it's all for in many ways. I mean, you know, in an interview, David said that all the practicalities, like feeding ourselves and having a place to live, you know, that's like the needle hiss. You know, that's that's an aside that should be dealt with without a real thought. And then you get on with the real business of actually living. And well, again, a bit of an aside, but like I recently discovered that Maslow's hierarchy was based in Native American thinking. And that for them, like the top of Maslow's hierarchy is self-actualization. for them, that's the bottom. Then above self-actualization, you've got communal actualization, and then you've got cultural perpetuity. And they didn't even think about the stuff like, you know, having enough food to eat and shelter, which is at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, because who could imagine a culture so insane that people don't have that? You know, like, where would you even begin? And so, to get back to your original question about Knockmoyle and the Happy Pig, where I live in County Galway in Ireland, really what we're doing is living together in ways that aren't based in money at all, and are based in the natural world and the informal economy. My friend Mark, he used to live in Bristol in the southwest of England, and he was sort of looking at the state of the world, and he thought, God, everyone I know pretty much who's doing something they don't believe in, they're doing it for money. And so some friend of his said to him, God, if you hate money so much, why don't you just give it up? And he went, all right then. And so he ended up living for 3 years without money. That's a whole story in itself, and he wrote a book called The Moneyless Man about it. But he'd never been happier, and then we started plotting together to create some kind of place where that could happen. And ironically, the Moneyless Man book sold incredibly well, and so then he found himself with a pot of money from writing a book about living without money. And we were like, well, what does it make sense to do with this money? And so we thought, well, as we see it, we've bought that piece of land out of slavery, if you like, as slaves would buy their families out of slavery. We've bought it out of the market economy, and made it into a place where so we have this kind of free inn on site called the Happy Pig, where people can come and stay for free, and you know, they're looked after and welcome. And it's interesting to me how wildly radical that sounds to modern ears, you know, the idea of providing such things without charging anybody. But it seems to us that all we're doing is rekindling the tradition of hospitality, that, you know, it would be very normal that if someone turned up on your doorstep, you put them up for the night. That was just a typical thing not so very long ago. And I think what killed it was mass travel, really. I mean, you can do that if 3 people come through your village every year. If 3,000 people come through your village every year, you can't really. It's just not feasible. In the same way that all of us know, you know, if you're out in the countryside and you bump into someone on the street, you might stop and chat to them for 5 minutes about nothing in particular. Try doing that in the middle of London with every person you pass. It's literally impossible. And so, of course, you gradually retreat into more of an individualized bubble. And so yeah, I think what we're doing right is really what David advocated, which is stepping back from the monetary economy enough to be able to slow down enough to be able to actually know each other and care about each other and talk about what's important to us, and basing it as far as we are able in the natural world, not in a spirit of self-sufficiency, because in some ways I think that's the green movement's equivalent of financial independence. It's a myth, you know, we're not independent, we're absolutely interdependent with the natural world, but helping to defend and help restore and rewild the natural world strikes me as a very appropriate relationship of reciprocity with a system that makes all life possible, and so making that more explicit to ourselves and doing that kind of dirty-handed work, yeah, is a healing thing for all involved, I think.
Yeah, I just so want to come and visit. So have to work that out at some point. I'm also
sure there are wonderful places closer by.
Yeah, there are some wonderful places, and I have such an ambivalence about like never flying again. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, really.
Big topic.
Yeah, right. I'm curious if you wouldn't mind stepping into that other question I asked you about. When you look out into the world these days, things that get your attention, your concern, things that weigh a little heavy on your heart when you see them going the direction they're going. Anything that comes to mind?
Well, for me, I think everyone who commits themselves to I don't know, a particular aim or cause or whatever has something that, I don't know, is in their mind's eye and is why they do this. And for me personally, it's been forests. I as I grew up, the place I always felt safest was forests, and the ongoing devastation of the ancient woodlands and forests and jungles of the world, and the various ways in which we're contriving to create a future with which they may be incompatible, yeah, is kind of where I come back to. Just these incredible, I mean, in some cases, literally ancient beings, these beings that have individuals who've been there for thousands of years, who can be like, oh yeah, Jesus Christ, I remember him. He sat under me for a while, like that length of lifespan, and are so, it seems so wildly, I don't know what word to use, unwise seems too small, like just so wildly inappropriate to, I don't know, greet them with chainsaws, and yeah. So for all the innumerable unfolding interrelated cataclysms on our globe today, like the symbol for all of that for me is an ancient forest being destroyed. It just tells of such profound ignorance on the part of our culture, I might add, not our species. There are plenty of examples of our species that wouldn't dream of that, and plenty of human cultures that couldn't conceive of that as an appropriate course of action. And I think that's so important to stress, because there's such a thing at the moment about, humanity is the virus and all of this. No, the culture, the globalized culture that I was born into, that's the virus. That's the vetigo, the cannibalist mind sickness that's spread around the world. And I think that's so important, because this idea that humans are inherently destructive or evil or whatever, again, it's deep enough in people that people are killing themselves over this. They're like, well, I'm a human, I want no part of this, I can't see any reason to exist, the best thing I can do for the world is die, when it would seem to me so much more appropriate to say, no, this culture is sick, and to turn that horror not inwards but outwards, and to point it at this culture, to use that as motivation to remove one's allegiance from it and get to work, as I say, resisting or creating alternatives or sustaining the natural world or whatever it is. I find it so painful, that this kind of there is no alternative message has been so effectively spread by the kind of centralized billionaire controlled media, that our imaginations are so atrophied that people would die before imagining that it's possible to do something better.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's when I look to the forest that I weep.
Yeah, thank you. My particular anchor in life is the ocean, and I similarly had a really early experience. It's simple enough. Watching Jacques Cousteau's specials they always happened on Sunday nights when I was a kid, and he would almost always punctuate at the end of the special. He would talk about the damage that was going on from human beings in the vicinity of this gorgeous place that they've been talking about. And I was consistently the only one in tears during that. And I was the only one that had any sort of thought of the continuity of, well, is anybody going to do anything about this? And so I kept listening for and asking about. And so it was quite early on that I just saw we're going to kill it off. And it was also during that time that I, mostly because of Jacques Cousteau, that I realized this is a water planet. This is the ocean. The oceans are the center. And so if we kill off the oceans, yeah. So thank you for sharing your anchor as well. I was really surprised and moved during your last course, this deep dive course that you just finished up. I can override with the best of them. I consider one of the superpowers of our global culture our ability to override the natural upwelling of our connectedness with deeper self, with other people, with the earth, and with even our souls. I can be as mental and linear and overriding as the next person, even though I know better. And I found myself, the surprising part was I was surprised how one of your guests in particular, just the nature of his spirit and his expression. And this was not a hope-filled rainbows and unicorns conversation. This was somebody who's very, very clear what's going on and what's not working well in the human culture, the dominant culture, and someone who's been engaged for a long time in trying to bring about something different. And so Rob Hopkins was one of your guests, and by the end of it, I'm actually a little bit moved right now just to remember it was so simple how he expressed himself, and so very, very human, and just a couple inches away from where I was sitting in my override, in my linearity, in my mental fixation, and to find myself, by what I mean by a couple inches away, was just such an easy nudge from his delightful presence and his compelling presentation of this is possible. None of us knows what's out ahead, and it's not looking good. And this is possible. I found myself just gently nudged into an entirely different possibility, into basking in his presence, in his remarkably open and really loving presence. So I wanted to tell you about that, share with you about that, because it was a lovely surprise. And I learned a tremendous amount in that session almost nothing to do with the content. I'm very, very grateful that you put that together, that particular episode, and so much more. And I'm curious if you would share, perhaps you could start with just a little bit more about what the choices you made about who to include in your series. You know, the folks from the person from Zad and Rob and anything else that you'd like to say about those choices. But perhaps even more importantly, could you speak a little bit about the people that you've recently just found yourself being significantly inspired by, people that really seem to hold some novel possibility in being, in presence, in being human beings together in this time. I'm just curious if you could share anything about anyone that comes to mind.
Sure. Yeah, I remember about, I don't know, I guess about 15 years ago, someone asked me who my heroes were, and I was really surprised to find that nobody came to mind, other than some musicians, but I didn't think that was quite what they were after. Really surprised me. I hadn't noticed that gap. And then I think about a year or so later, I was glad to write a blog post called My New Heroes, because I'd found some. There's a lot of things you said there that kind of tie together. And so Rob Hopkins is someone who I think of more as a friend, but I first met Rob Hopkins and David Fleming at the same time. They both taught me in 2006 at Schumacher College, and we've basically have been friends ever since. I mentioned that I've been through a couple of episodes of burnout, and I remember as I was struggling with one of these, and this was while I was working on the ecological land cooperative project, I remember calling Rob to talk things through with him. And he said two things to me that have always stuck with me. And one was, life is just a series of things we're not quite ready for yet. Which I really enjoyed. You know, when you're feeling like overwhelmed and like this is all too much, it's like, it's okay. That's how life goes, you know, and you'll get through this. And the other one was, without getting into all the details, I sort of was facing this challenging situation and explained to him how I was thinking of engaging with it. And he said to me, you know, that all sounds very apt, Shaun. But the way you describe it, it doesn't sound very fun. And I think if it's not fun, it's not sustainable. And I had this weird feeling at the time where I was like, I can feel that there's a wisdom in what he's saying that I really need right now. And I can also tell that I can't hear it. And off I went into my burnout and learned lessons the hard way, as we often do. And I think now I hear that wisdom and would like to honor that. You know, I think at that time I had this real brain-driven analysis of all the problems we were facing in the world and the kind of life for myself that seemed to make sense in relation to all of that. But there wasn't really any, God, I'm excited by this. It was like, yes, this feels like what I should do. Well, actually, one of the other participants on the deeper dive that we just finished coined this word, oughtlessness, which I really like. I'm a big fan of oughtlessness. I don't like shoulds. I don't like oughts. I think, at least not objective ones. I mean, you know, obviously, if you're trying to get to a particular place, then you should turn right, you know, fine. But like some absolute should or ought, not so healthy, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think I won't say too much about the other choices of guests on the deeper dive, because I could talk about each of them for a long time. But the kind of inspiration who springs to mind for me right now is Wendell Berry, the Kentucky farmer and author, who wrote a line, many lines actually. In fact, I was recently reading a collection of his writing called What Are People For, which seems very pertinent to what you're talking about. But there's a line of his: protest that endures, I think, is driven by a hope far more modest than that of public success. The hope of preserving something in one's heart and spirit that would be destroyed by acquiescence. And that's what I come back to in this kind of post-doom dark optimism space, is I want to live in a way that doesn't destroy my heart and spirit in the way that acquiescence to the mainstream would. And living to honor that doesn't allow me to move into just the futility of despair either. You know, as you say, you know, Rob is well aware of the mess, but hey, look what's possible. You know, look what we could create. Like, look what we can do now that's just beautiful, and it might not save the world. I mean, I'm really interested in, you know, Joanna Macy talked about the Great Turning, and I've always had some misgivings about that, and I've been very interested recently to hear her saying that she's kind of reevaluating that concept of the Great Turning, and that really, you know, we're not as a society going to have this collective Great Turning to sanity, but there's still something very powerful in that couple of inches shift in perspective that you're talking about, that maybe that humble turning, we could say. And the other kind of name that comes to mind for me when you ask about inspirations is someone who I actually know very little about, but I would consider an inspiration purely for the fact that they wrote a poem called Desiderata, Max Airman. And that poem, along with some of Rilke's, is just such profound guidance for existing. And in particular, what I'm really, what I'm holding and being changed by is this line from that poem Desiderata, and there are many incredible lines, but there's one line: whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. And that just floors me, because I'm like, well, duh. I mean, by what power could it possibly not be, right? Like, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. And, oh my God, the injustice in the world. And we're killing everything. And to be like, I can't find any way in which both of those aren't true. No doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Well, how could it not be? And by God, of course, everything's just deeply wrong. Like, you know, if you don't know that the level of injustice and destruction in the world, then you're just not paying attention. And what does that mean if both those things are true? And that's, yeah, that's something I'm really sitting with at the moment. And despite knowing just about nothing else about Max Airman, I'm gonna put him there as one of my inspirations right now, and for most of my life, because that poem, I mean, my word, like if all that a person did in their life was produce that poem, that's a hell of a life well lived in my book.
Yeah. I so appreciate you uh, reminding me of desiderata. It's been years since I've looked at it at all. So I will definitely do that and include that in some way in whatever the form of this interview gets posted. Um, Shaun Chamberlin, it's an ongoing pleasure to get to know you at the next layer and the next layer. And I so thank you for your work and for your heart, for your love of life, your love of forests, your ability to weave a tale as you tour us through some of your neighborhood, some of your history, some of what matters to you, some of what concerns you, some of what you love. I don't know that I have any more questions for you. And I'm just curious if there's anything that you'd like to wrap this up with any sort of, perhaps the desiderata is the perfect ending. I don't know. Is there any way that you'd like to put a bow on it at the end here?
I'll read it to you if you like.
Oh my goodness, absolutely.
Desiderata by Airman. Go placidly amid the noise and the haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible, without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly, and listen to others, even to the dull and the ignorant. They too have their story. Avoid loud and aggressive persons. They are vexatious to the spirit. If you compare yourself with others, you may become vain or bitter, for always there will be greater and lesser persons than yourself. Enjoy your achievements as well as your plans. Keep interested in your own career, however humble. It is a real possession in the changing fortunes of time. Exercise caution in your business affairs, for the world is full of trickery. But let this not blind you to what virtue there is. Many persons strive for high ideals, and everywhere life is full of heroism. Be yourself. Especially do not feign affection. Neither be cynical about love, for in the face of all aridity and disenchantment, it is as perennial as the grass. Take kindly the counsel of the years, gracefully surrendering the things of youth. Nurture strength of spirit to shield you in sudden misfortune, but do not distress yourself with dark imaginings. Many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. Beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here. And whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore, be at peace with God, whatever you conceive him to be. And whatever your labors and aspirations, in the noisy confusion of life, keep peace in your soul. With all its sham, drudgery and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. Be cheerful. Strive to be happy.
Brother Shaun, thank you so much. It is a moving and nourishing experience to hang out with you. Thank you so much.
Likewise, Dean.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.